Hi, everyone. Welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Bruce.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today, we have the beginning of vaccines, a very important word. And if you read or hear English, you will be hearing this word probably all year to deal with the virus pandemic. One way to slow down the spread of the disease. If you have a successful vaccine, you can do that. I'm sure you're reading and hearing about it on a daily basis. Today, our article explains how did vaccines begin?
好，我们的中文标题是历史上最早的疫苗。好，所以看英文的话，其实指的就是疫苗的 beginning， 它的开始。好，所以它怎么样开始有疫苗的呢？这篇文章讲的是这个问题。
The day was May 14th, 1796. Edward Jenner, an English doctor who lived in Gloucestershire, obtained some fluid from a cowpox blister and applied it to the scratched skin of James Phipps, an 8-year-old boy. Phipps developed a blister and a fever, but had no significant reaction. This event would come to be known as the first vaccination in history, and would give us the very word vaccine. At the time of Jenner's test, inoculations against a number of illnesses were being done, but the practice was fairly risky. With his experiment, Jenner was hoping to find a safer way to immunize people against smallpox, a deadly infectious disease that killed millions all over the world. While still a medical student, he had noticed that milkmaids who had been infected with cowpox, a disease related to smallpox but less deadly, seemed to be immune to smallpox. After Jenner exposed Phipps to cowpox, the next step was to inject the child with smallpox material. Phipps didn't show any signs of the disease, even after a second injection. Proving that his patients were immune to the disease was one of the most significant parts of Jenner's work. Jenner went on to publish research that listed 23 separate cases of individuals, including his 11-month-old son, who had been inoculated with cowpox and became immune to smallpox. This vaccine, which was named for Jenner's Latin name for cowpox, variolae vaccinae, became the accepted preventive treatment for smallpox, and the practice of vaccinating populations against the illness spread around the world. Roughly 200 years after Jenner's initial experiment, the World Health Organization declared that smallpox had been eradicated from the world.
And a blessing that is. One could argue that modern medicine really kind of really took a huge step forward when this vaccine was first developed, because that gave us a control over disease that we never had before. The fact that we could actually rid the world of something that had been a huge scourge for thousands of years is really an amazing step forward.
好，所以这个疫苗的发明真的是非常的重要哈，尤其是就这个牛痘来讲呢，这个疫苗的发明，它让最后一句讲到，它让我们根除了天花这种疾病啊，那真的是人类很重要的一个福音。那天花这个疾病呢，欧洲当然也非常的严重，但是其实这个美洲很多的原住民啊，其实是死于天花，那个时候是一族一族、一村一村的死掉。因为欧洲人刚刚开始到美洲的时候，欧洲人他们对于天花有某种的免疫力，或者他们可能已经中了牛痘或怎么样的，但他们传给原住民的时候，原住民对于天花是一点抵抗力都没有啊，所以他们是一个 village 的被 wiped out。
You have to mention that they actually deliberately gave the smallpox to the natives. That wasn't accidental. It was biological warfare.
Yeah, 所以那个其实是生物战哈，因为那时候那个移民呢，欧洲的移民是故意把天花的病毒传给这些原住民，因为他们发现非常好用，好，那他们会把染有天花病毒的毯子就送给原住民当礼物。
Okay, so it was a day destined to go down in history, and that day was May 14th, 1796, a little under 300 years ago, a little over 300 years ago.
Yeah, 所以这一天会历史上留名哈，所以他说那一天呢是1796年的5月14日。
My math is bad. 200 years ago.
200年前了 Yeah.
Edward Jenner, an English doctor who lived in Gloucestershire, obtained some fluid from a cowpox blister and applied it to the scratched skin of James Phipps, an 8-year-old boy. Remember that name, James Phipps. We'll be talking about him later in the article. But now we're talking about Dr. Edward Jenner in England, in Gloucestershire, obtained some fluid. He took some fluid from a cowpox blister. This is the first time we see cowpox. It is a disease which causes fluid to make bumps in skin, whether of an animal or a person. Of course, cowpox, this disease, was first found in animals. And he took some of the fluid. He cut into a blister, took some fluid out, and applied it to the scratched skin. He he wiped it into the skin of an 8-year-old boy whose name is, or was, James Phipps.
好，所以 Edward Jenner 同位语告诉你，他是一位英国的医生啊，他住在这 Gloucestershire 这个地方，他 obtained 他取得了一些 fluid 一些液体，从哪里取得呢？从一个牛痘的水泡里面取得了一些液体啊 ，cowpox 就是牛痘啊 ，cow 就是牛，那个 pox 就是痘或者疹啊。那这个 blister 就是皮肤上的水泡啊，他从牛痘的水泡里面取得了一些液体，然后呢 applied it to 就把它涂抹在apply 在这里就是涂抹的意思哈 ，to put onto 的意思，把它涂抹在那个 scratched skin 这个 scratched 就是划破的或者抓伤的已经被划破的、已经被抓伤的这个皮肤是谁的皮肤呢？是James Phipps 这个人的皮肤上。那这个人是谁呢？同位语告诉你，他是个 an 8-year-old boy， 他是8岁小男孩。
Phipps, the boy, developed a blister and a fever, so he got a skin reaction and his body gave a reaction, but he had no significant reaction. He didn't actually develop the disease.
Yeah, 那 Phipps developed 你可以说是长出来，他长了一个水泡那 developed 也可以表示你得到了什么病所以他长出了水泡，然后呢他发烧了 a fever， 他 developed a fever， 他发展出他长出他生成了他得到了一个发烧所以他皮肤长了水泡而且发烧，但是呢 had no significant reaction， 但是没有什么显著的或者很重大的一些不良反应reaction 反应。
This event, meaning this experiment by Dr. Jenner on the patient James Phipps, would come to be known as the first vaccination in history. There wasn't the word vaccination at that time, and no one else had done anything like this before. But when Jenner did it and proved that you can take disease from an animal, put it into a person to stop another disease, a more deadly disease. And this process, they used the word vaccine, and we'll find out where this word exactly comes from in a couple more paragraphs.
OK， 所以这一个事件呢 would come to be known as 就是后来大家称它为这个历史上第一个的这个 vaccination因为当时还没有这个字就或这个字当时还不是这样用的。好，那同时这个事件呢 would give us the very word， 它会给我们这一个字这个 vaccine 这一个字。
Now, at the time of Jenner's test, at the time that he did this thing, inoculations against a number of illnesses were being done. Inoculations is the practice of putting a weakened form of a disease into somebody's body with the hopes that they'll develop antibodies against the disease and instead of getting sick. Like they'll get a little bit sick but recover and then be immune as opposed to getting all the way sick and dying. So this is a thing that was already happening. It wasn't this that he, out of the blue sky, decided to do this. This was a thing that was going on with a number of scientists. But the practice was fairly risky. And it was risky because a not small portion of these people who were getting inoculated went on to get the disease and died or were scarred for life.
好，所以在他测试在这个试验的时候呢 ，inoculations 就是预防接种哈，那 against 是对抗哈，就是借由预防接种来对抗 a number of illnesses 一些疾病，这样的做法呢 were being done 就是有人在做了。好，但是呢 the practice 就是这种做法呢还是 fairly 就是 rather 哈，还相当的 risky 就是冒险的 involving risk or danger。
With his experiment, Jenner was hoping to find a safer way to immunize people against smallpox. At that time, smallpox was one of the worst diseases in the world by the number of people who died from it or were scarred for life from it and so on. And it's further described as a deadly infectious disease. It's easy to spread from one person by simple contact to another, and it was actually killing millions of people all over the world.
好，所以 with his experiment, Jenner was hoping to 他希望能够 find a safer way to 找一个比较安全的方法来 immunize people against smallpox。immunize 就是使免疫那使人们能够免疫，对什么的免疫呢 ？against smallpox 对于天花能免疫，他希望能找到一个比较安全的方法，让人们对于天花能免疫。那这里同位语告诉你天花是什么呢？他说是个 deadly infectious disease。deadly 就是 capable of causing death 就是这个会让你死的会致命的意思所以这是一种致命的，然后呢是一种 infectious 是会传染的这样的一个疾病。好，那这样的疾病呢是 that killed 他这个杀害了或者是致死是 millions 就是 millions of people all over the world。 所以当时呢天花让全世界呢有数百万人就因此而丧生，所以他希望能够找一个办法让人们能够对他免疫。
So while still a medical student, while he was still just studying medicine, he had a fundamental insight that his later success was based on. He had noticed that milkmaids, these are the women whose job was milking the cows every morning, and the dairy industry was very big in Britain. This was this is one of the main occupations for women who were working. He discovered that those milkmaids who had been infected with cowpox, if you're infected with something, it means that you've got that disease. So they got cowpox, which is a disease related to smallpox, but it's less deadly. So you can die from cowpox, but you're much less likely to die from cowpox or be scarred from cowpox than smallpox. And he noticed that these milkmaids, once they had recovered from cowpox, seemed to be immune to smallpox, which is interesting because even though they knew these diseases were related, they weren't sure, they didn't know that there would be a protection from one to the other. Because you're immune to one disease, you can also create an immunity to another disease. That was an interesting insight.
Insight 就是一个真知灼见INSIGHT 所以就是那个时候的人能够想到说，这两个天花跟这个牛痘是相似的、相关的，但是他能够想到说用牛痘能够对抗天花这的确是一个 insight 他们想到了一个很棒的 idea。 好，所以这个句子他讲说 while 就当 still 当他还是个 medical student 的时候呢，还是个医学院的学生的时候呢， he had noticed that 他有注意到 milkmaids 就是挤奶的女工a girl or a woman who milks cow。 好，那他注意到这些感染到 who had been infected with cowpox 感染到牛痘的这些挤奶的女工所以不止一个它有好几个。那 infect 在这里是动词就感染，所以 been infected with 就是受到什么感染，所以这些受到这个牛痘感染的这些挤奶的女工呢，好，那 seemed to 似乎是 be immune to smallpox 似乎是对于天花就免疫了， immune 就是免疫， be immune to 就对什么免疫。那中间呢 cowpox 后面它还有一对要用这个dash 连这个空出来或者圈出来的一个同位语告诉你 cowpox 是什么东西呢？它是一个 disease 是一种疾病 related to smallpox 它跟天花有关related to 但是呢 less deadly 但没有那么致命。
After Jenner exposed Phipps to cowpox, which we described earlier in the lesson. The next step was to inject the child with smallpox material to test his theory that if you can become immune from, if you get cowpox, maybe that will give you immunity from smallpox.
OK， 好，所以在这个 Jenner exposed 就是使他暴露于，好，或者使他接触到，好，他使谁接触到暴露于呢？他让这个 Phipps 接触到，好 ，expose Phipps to 就是让 Phipps 接触到 cowpox 的之后呢 ，the next step 下一步就是 to inject the child with inject 是注射，好，注射这个小孩用什么注射呢 ？with smallpox material 用一些这个天花的物质，好 substance material 的 substance 来注射到小孩子的身上。
So Phipps didn't show any signs of the disease, meaning smallpox, because this is the second injection. So the second step. He didn't show any signs of smallpox. There was no indication that he got smallpox, even after a second injection. So they deliberately injected the child with smallpox twice, and he never got sick from it.
好，所以 Phipps 没有 show any signs of， 他没有显示任何的迹象。好，什么东西的迹象呢 ？of the disease 就是指这个天花哈，他没有显示任何天花的迹象，甚至于在一个怎么样第二次的注射之后，所以打一次没有天花的迹象，打第二次还是没有显示任何这个疾病天花疾病的迹象。
Okay, next sentence. Proving that his patients were immune to the disease by experimenting with the boy Phipps, first giving him cowpox and then smallpox, but he didn't react to the smallpox. So he proved that his patients were immune to the disease. Doing this was one of the most significant, one of the most meaningful parts of Jenner's work.
好，所以这一句话的主词是一个动名词片语 ，proving that his patients， 他证明他的病人呢 were immune to， 对于什么免疫呢？对于 the disease， 就是对天花免疫他证明了他的病人对天花免疫这样的一件事情呢 ，was one of the most significant parts of Jenner's work。好，是 Jenner 他的这个他的成就他所做的事情里面最重要、最意义重大的一件事情，就是他证明了他的病人对天花免疫了。
His heart must have been in his throat, though, as he gave those injections, because, like, here's this perfectly healthy boy, and he may, you know what I mean? He's playing with fire there.
Yeah, 他的心在他的喉咙里面，表示他提心吊胆。他那时候一定觉得提心吊胆了，觉得哇，糟糕，这个到底会不会成功
Yeah, because the price is so high.
Yeah, 因为这个代价非常的高。
But he was successful, and so he went on to publish research. If you go on to do something, it means that's the next step in your process. So he proved the thing, and once it was proved, he continued to the next step of publishing research that listed 23 separate cases of individuals, including his 11-month-old son, who had been inoculated with cowpox and became immune to smallpox. So he convinced 23 separate people to take this risk, and he convinced his wife to risk his son. And he showed that it is indeed true, that if you're infected with a related lesser disease, you can be immune to a stronger disease.
Yeah, went on to 就是继续进一步他继续进一步他出版了他的研究那这个研究里面呢 listed 他有列出23个 separate 就是不同的个别的 cases 所以不同的案例有23个案例of individuals 都是23个一个人个别的个人的案例那这23个人里面这23个案例里面包括他11个月大的儿子那这些人呢都被 inoculated with cowpox 都注射了牛痘然后呢became immune to smallpox 然后呢都变成对于天花免疫了。
This vaccine, which was named for Jenner's Latin name for cowpox, diseases and animals and plants have Latin names according to a system of classification, and diseases also do because they are bacteria or viruses. They're living things. And the Latin name he chose was Variolae vaccinae, and it is from vaccinae, which is related to the Latin word for cow, That's how we get the word vaccine today. It became accepted by other doctors and the public, as well as, much more importantly than the name, is that he found a preventative treatment for smallpox. And starting with Jenner, going into the next century, more and more people were immunized against smallpox until we find in the last sentence, but we're not there yet.
好，所以呢，这个句子他说，好 ，this vaccine， 哈，这一个疫苗呢，那后面告诉你 ，which was named for， 这个疫苗是以谁的名字来取的呢？以这个 Jenner's 它的 Latin name。for cowpox， 所以 Jenner 他为这个牛痘呢取了一个拉丁文的名字啊，那就是刚刚 Bruce 老师念的那个名字。好，那不过拉丁文的名字这个 vaccine 这个或者 vaccinate 哈，这个字本来是跟牛有关系的。好，所以总之就是这个 Jenner 他给牛痘取了这么一个拉丁文。好，那这个因为这个拉丁文，所以这个 vaccine 这个疫苗就从此得到这个名字。好，那这句话的主词就是 this vaccine， 那动词是 became， 好，所以这个疫苗 became 变成了 the accepted preventive treatment。那 accepted 就是被接受的，就大家所认可、所接受的一个 preventative， 它这里是 preventative， 但其实 preventative 就是 preventive。啊，这两个字是意思是一样的哈，就是预防性的，所以它是一种 preventative treatment， 是一种预防的疗法啊，对于天花来讲是个预防的疗法，就是你接种这个疫苗就好了。然后呢，下面这个子句 the practice of 就这种做法，什么做法呢？ vaccinating populations 就是给人群接种啊 populations 就是在一个地方的人口就叫所有的人就叫一个 population， 所以 populations 就是不同地方、不同城市啊、不同国家的人啊，你给他接种啊，为人群接种疫苗这样的一种做法。against the illness 用来对抗这个疾病，这样的一种做法 the practice 动词是 spread around the world， 所以这样的一种做法呢就传遍了全世界，全世界的人都知道说要给他们的人民啊这个接种疫苗就可以对抗天花这个疾病。
And I'm sure that Jenner would be really pleased to know that roughly 200 years after his initial experiment, after he first tried giving the boy cowpox, the World Health Organization declared that smallpox had been eradicated from the world. Eradicated is normally a very negative word. It means that something has been completely removed. It has been completely and thoroughly destroyed. But in this case, that is a very good thing.
Yeah, 这个 eradicate 这个字啊，它的字根啊 ，e 就是 out， 那个 rad 啊跟 root 有关是根，所以这个字就是中文讲的根除，好，连根拔除，所以 eradicate 就是 to tear up by the roots， 好，把它连根拔除，也就是 to get rid of， to eliminate， 把它完全消灭掉了，好。或者是 stamp out 啊，这个我们就是、stamp out STAMP 啊，把它踩齐了。
That's a common word also used in these kinds of articles.
啊，所以这也是一个很常见的一种用法，所以就是完全根除了。所以呢，大概200年之后，在这个Jenner 他的 initial 就是他第一次的这个 experiment， 他开头的啊就是 initial 的那个实验之后呢，200年之后，世界卫生组织宣布天花已经被从世界上根除了，就是世界上已经没有天花这种疾病了。
For eradicate, we can also simply say rid, R-I-D.
Oh, yeah.
Often get rid of, but you can rid
yourself
the world from, yes.
Yeah, rid 可以当及物动词来用，这也是常常可以取代 eradicate。其实还有另外一个字也很棒啊 ，obliterate。
Whoa.
这个字比较强一点 ，obliterate 是 O-B-L-I-T-E-R-A-T-E 哈 ，obliterate 就是 to remove 或者 destroy completely， 那重点是 as to leave no trace， 它完全没有找不到任何痕迹的，完全消除掉，那个 obliterate。Obliterates
is more like something that you'd use from bombs. I don't think that we'd obliterate disease so much because obliterate kind of is like total destruction as opposed to getting rid of something.
Yeah, 所以这个 obliterate 这个是比较强，好像感觉起来是好像这个原子弹炸下去那种感觉哈，所以比较在这个跟疾病呢比较不合啊，不是那么适合一起用，但 it's a good word to know.
It's a good word to know.
Yeah.Well,
that's it for today's lesson. Now, aren't you glad you put away your handkerchiefs? Because you don't need them again. Tomorrow we'll be back. Till then,
bye-bye.